I'm Perry Clausen, Executive Director of the East San Joaquin Water Coalition, and what we have today is an overview, as we do every year. I've got a little illustration I'm going to go to here in a few minutes, but I'm going to start out by handing it over to my workmate here, Katie, and she's going to talk about the activities on our website and portal.
I'm Katie Campadonico. I'm staff here at ESJ and also the Stanislaus County Farm Bureau. A couple things we're going to go over right off the bat here is the member packet. So this isn't new. You've seen the member packet for the last several years, but this has all of your requirements in one spot. You'll see a couple things in there are due on March 1st. Everything in there is due on March 1st this year. So your dues and your irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report are both due on March 1st. And your irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet is to be completed, signed off, and stay on farm by March 1st. So the member assistance workshops are kind of the open office hours we do. We host them in each of the Farm Bureau offices. Here in Stanislaus County, we host them on Mondays and Tuesdays from 10 to 2. Drop by anytime. You can meet with Brittany or myself. We can go through all of your paperwork, kind of get you all covered. But you can also call us anytime and we can make an appointment for a convenient time to come on in. New thing here, it's actually not that new, but the new member portal. You can go online anytime, complete all of your requirements there, so it gives you that 24/7 access, and you can also check back, make sure everything is done, completed. It'll tell you by showing you these completed bars at the bottom of the requirements. So you can do your member information, you can add parcels, take parcels away, update acreage, change crops, so it makes all of those changes very easy. And you can also complete your requirements here. So we have the irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report. You can go ahead and complete right on the portal. And you can see your farm evaluation, which won't be due until next year, so we'll have that built out next year. You can go ahead and fill out your farm evaluation there. And kind of a neat feature is this document repository number 7 here. You can go back and see all of your prior year's paperwork. So everything you've ever turned into the Water Coalition is there, which is nice if you wanted to go back and see what's happened in the last couple of years. You have access to all of your old paperwork. This is sort of what that summary report tool looks like. So if you were to go online and complete your summary report, this is sort of what that interface would look like. You can input your ranch name, acreage, APN, that's all there. County is there. You can put in your specific crop, year planted, especially with your trees and anything like that. We've been using year planted. And you can put in the amount of nitrogen you applied, yield information. You know, if you're almonds and you're reporting meat weights or field weight, that stuff is very handy for us to know. And you'll see on the side, I don't know how well you can see it right here, but it has kind of a completed, so it'll say it's 100% completed or 50% completed, and that's a way for you to track, you know, if it's been submitted or not. You can see that very easily. And the last part of the new irrigation and nitrogen management summary report is these management questions, and these are all about your irrigation and nitrogen practices that you apply on your farm. This was previously on your farm evaluation, so the question isn't super new, but it's a little bit of a different format. So you'll see these questions here. And one thing we're looking at building out, we're going to take kind of a little hand poll after this, so pay attention for me if you would. But we're looking at creating a new irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet online tool. So this is that report you do at the beginning of the year. It's signed off and you keep on farm. This new tool would allow kind of some simplified steps here. Previously, you would have done it on a worksheet. You would have kind of filled out what you would do at the beginning of the year and leave the actual for the end of the year. You'd kind of track the amount of nitrogen you'd use over the course of the year. You'd calculate your totals. You'd input them into the worksheet and then into the summary report. And then you could put them into the portal or summary report and send it in to us. This new tool here would allow you to put in what you expected you were going to use, your expected yield, all of your numbers, and then throughout the year, you could put in your nitrogen application, sort of track what you were doing. It would automatically pull those numbers, tally them, keep a running total, and input them into your summary report for you, which would, you know, kind of take away a step for you instead of completing that form twice. Then at the end, you could go through, you'd have to approve it. It wouldn't submit by itself. You'd have to go through, approve all the numbers, make sure you got all your nitrogen applications, and then submit it. So it would kind of consolidate a step. So this is one of our new tools we're looking at building. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to do something a little bit different here. We're again talking about the nitrate issues that we have in groundwater. We are going to live with that. All of us graybeards are going to be long gone, and our kids are going to still be dealing with this issue. So it's really important for us to understand, for everybody to understand what it is we're up against. And we've tried to emphasize that in every one of our meetings, and every year we go on working with the regulators, the environmental justice community, disadvantaged communities, we find out we are really going to be under the pressure to make improvements in the way that we use nitrogen fertilizer and the way we manage our groundwater aquifers. And one of the facts that we're dealing with this whole situation is our groundwater problems are as a result of decades of nitrates leaching in the groundwater. This didn't all just happen about 5 years ago. This has been 100 years of accumulated nitrates from ag, admittedly, but also cities, food processors. Whoever has nitrate in their waste discharges that are put onto land will likely eventually end up into groundwater. And you know, the program we're in now, the reporting of our nitrogen use and trying to track who may be putting on a little too much is something that we really want to pay attention to. So one thing that has come out of the Basin Plan Amendment that was recently adopted, it's in your annual report, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, is that we're going to be given more time to reach the standards in groundwater, the drinking water standard for our discharges, in fact, up to 35 years extra time. But in the meantime, in order to get that extension, we are going to have to, along with the other permit holders, provide clean drinking water to those domestic well users that are not in agriculture that are being impacted by these, both legacy and some of these current discharges. So, you know, we've had this slide before, but it was some work done by the University of California that went in and took some of this water out of the aquifer and did a DNA tracking or analysis, a fingerprinting, if you will, of where is the nitrate coming from. And this is hard to see, but the point that you'll see is there's different colors. Ag is green, dairy is brown, blue is natural background. So those slices of the pie vary in each of these areas, some more ag, some less ag, but the point being is that our fingerprint is on all of the DNA of nitrate that is in these groundwater aquifers. So we have irrigated agriculture throughout the Central Valley has a share of the contribution over this time. So we are going to be charged with a share of remediating these problems. One of the things that we are doing, the biggest impact to us, have you all seen since 2012? We got to report our fertilizer use, our nitrogen fertilizer use. It's never been done before. We all know that. And what we have to do is then the coalition analyzes your data and compares your application information to other growers of the same crop. That is our first check of how we doing. I mean, how am I doing compared to my neighbors with the same crop, the same similar yield? And then once that's done, we are finding what's called statistical outliers. These are growers' fields over 3 years that are consistently putting on more nitrogen than they are taking off in the crop yield that they harvest off the crop. Mike's going to go into a little bit more detail on that, but again, the first components of this fixing the problem is us understanding if we're contributing. If we're not, we're in good shape. If we are contributing, then there's some adjustments that need to be made. So just critical to this is this crop coefficient number. This is the number that is multiplied times your yield to determine how much nitrate, how much nitrogen is removed from the field and taken off in the harvest off to market somewhere. So this is a crop coefficient. Again, we'll talk about it a little bit more detail, but this number is really going to be important. You know, I grow nectarines down in Fresno County, and I tell you, the number is not very good, and it's downright scary when I look at what do I put on and what I'm taking off. I mean, I've got some serious decisions I have to make about fertilizer management because the numbers are just unbelievable. They're not good quality numbers, though. So those are the types of areas the coalitions are going to focus on. We've got good numbers for almonds, walnuts, pistachios, pretty good, but after that it starts falling away, and we don't have really good data to say that's the amount of nitrogen it's taken off with 1,000 pounds of nut meats, for example. So one thing about these numbers and the way we're reporting fertilizer, it's a very coarse way to look at it, but it's a beginning. And it's coarse, yet we don't want to go to where it's fine-tuned because the amount of data that you would have to report would just be overwhelming. And the points that we're not reporting, and again, we don't want to, is when did you put that fertilizer on? I can put 200 pounds on and you can put 200 on. I can do it all at once and you can put it spoon-fed throughout the year. Which is going to have more contribution to groundwater is that slug of nitrogen. Now that's an extreme example, but we're not tracking that. So we don't know that. We don't know how much, if you're doing the split applications, how much you're putting on each time, because that's going to be relevant to how much your crop takes up, and then potentially how much is residual in the groundwater. And then, you know, the big issue that we're really hoping not to go into is the timing, the amounts of irrigation water. Sigma may take us down there, but for now, you need to estimate it on the report that you keep on the farm. But right now, we're not having to report either the total amount of water or the timing of that irrigation water. But that is, those of you who know irrigation efficiency, that's paramount in understanding, am I moving excess nitrates down into groundwater? So how are we going to figure this thing out? When we were negotiating the order, our new order that has the fertilizer applications in it, the activists wanted your data, your name, and your field identified, and this calculation done on your field, and determine how much nitrate is coming from my farm and going into the groundwater right before my feet. And we argued successfully that you can't do it that way. There's too many variables. Having one farm and doing the numbers and trying to figure out contribution, it's too complicated. There's no way it can be done. So what we suggested, and it was adopted, is we would do this analysis on a township basis. In other words, we would take the whole area, all the farms in a township, and do these calculations, and then come up with a potential contribution of nitrates in the groundwater. So what this is called is a groundwater protection formula, which is how you add up and figure out what's going on. The value, that's the total of all the variables, and then the target. What is the number we're trying to reach in groundwater? Right now, the standard is 10 milligrams per liter for nitrate. What we are going to propose is interim targets, because some of our water bodies, our aquifers, are 30 to 50 to 100 milligrams per liter right now. So we're already behind the 8 ball. So what we're going to be proposing is interim targets. So it's hard to see, I understand, but the idea here is that it's 36 square miles. There's approximately 23,000 acres in each township. And then all the growers in that area, we're going to be taking that information, and this is several years away yet, and then we're going to be calculating what is potentially impacting groundwater. And you can look at your cover on your annual report, helps a little bit, but this is the illustration that we're using. So we've got the trees or the crop on the top, then whatever goes past the root zone is potentially excess nitrate that can move to groundwater. Then we have the soil layers and microbial action and other things going on, and then that hits the groundwater eventually. So what the formula is A minus R, your applied minus your removed, that equals the excess. That's one number in the formula. The other number is your soil type. Another number that goes in there is how much rainfall is in an area. Another number in the formula is how much other factors like soil types or soil barriers, impermeable clay barriers. So that formula is being developed right now. We're in the middle with all the other coalitions and the scientists to try to figure out what is this formula, A plus B minus C, or other components of that actual formula. It's more complicated than that to understand. Okay, now I'm going to do something that I tried at the last meeting on Tuesday, and I think it worked out pretty well. So here is an illustration I want to give. And I always, before I do these sorts of things, suspend disbelief. So what that means is, I'm going to say the aquifer. It isn't the aquifer, obviously. And this is for farmers, obviously not for farmers. But here, I'm going to do an illustration here to show. Here's a township. Pretend. Let's do that. Pretend this is a 36-mile township. And we have 4 large growers. These quart jars are going to illustrate, or these half-gallon jars illustrate 4 growers. Each of them is going to put on 4 acre-feet of water. Again, suspend disbelief. Each one of these growers has 4 acre-feet of water. Then it's time to fertilize. Oh, I got to get my Mentos out here. Ooh. Okay, so one grower has pretty good yield, so he's going to put on about 200 pounds of nitrogen in his crop. So that's that fertilizer he puts in the water. Another grower, you know, he's going to just try to not even fertilize at all. So he's just going to do a little bit of fertilization. Another grower, let's call him the nectarine grower out of Reedley, California, says, I want 1,000 boxes an acre on my nectarine crop this year. My yield potential is 800 boxes. So there's no way I'm going to get 1,000 pounds. But I don't care. I'm going to put so much fertilizer on there. I'm going to make sure I get that 1,000 pounds. I'm going to have brown rot like crazy. But all right. And then we have another grower that's going to put in, you know, about the amount that is removed from this crop. So at the end of the crop year, what happens is we harvest the crop. So this is a Freightliner semi-truck hauling loads and loads of crop off the field. And it takes almost all that nitrogen off because I applied it and it was taken off in the crop. And then here's another grower that, here's the guy that wanted 1,000 pounds of boxes, and 1,000 boxes. He didn't quite do it. So he's got a bunch of nitrogen left over. And then another grower that didn't do very much, well, he probably didn't take out much crop either. He didn't put much nitrogen on. And then we have the grower that did just about everything right. He's not going to have anything left. So off this goes to the market. This is taken away. This nitrogen is not of our concern anymore. This is our crop coefficient that we want to understand what our yield is. This is all a plus to us. So then what happens after it starts raining is our nitrate gets leached into the groundwater. And this is our aquifer here. So any of this excess nitrate is going to make its way into the water, into the groundwater, most likely through rainfall. And so we have a drought for 5 years. What happens? It sits in the water soil profile, but then when it starts raining again, there it goes down into the aquifer. So the illustration is to say that nitrate is, once it goes past the root zone, away from biological activity, it's stable. It's not going to degrade anymore. There's some things that the scientists are saying, man, it might degrade a little bit. But the point being is most of that that's excess is going to go down into the aquifer in groundwater. Well, then here comes SGMA. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Authority. I don't know if I got that right, but we know what SGMA is. So the goal of this SGMA is for us to recharge our aquifers. You know, rainfall helps, but now there's a lot of talk about getting these recharge basins and getting more water into the aquifer for us to use for irrigation. But guess what? That is one of the best ways to dilute the nitrates we have in our groundwater. And the more water we can put into our aquifers, clean water, the lower our nitrate levels are going to be. That is completely out of this program's control, but it is a variable that over time is going to help us with the aquifer. This is going to help us, and this is going to help us. Taking off, getting out of the field as much as we can so that excess is minimized as much as we can in our aquifers. Okay, so that's enough of the illustration for the day. So the other part about our crop coefficients and what's being learned by the almond board, for instance, with almonds and walnuts and others, is these crop consumption curves. This is probably the best tool for nitrate management, nitrogen management that has been developed by the UC and private industry. Very simple. you match the applications to the consumption curves. You don't put it over here, this is a fall, because in this time of the year, you're going to get rainfall, and it's probably past the root zone into the aquifer. Same thing has been done with many annual crops. This is tomatoes. If you can match that application to the consumption curve, you have a far better nitrogen fertilizer use efficiency than you would if you slug it all in the beginning and hope that plant picks it all up. So anyway, we've got tools. It's not going to be easy. We've got years to go to get these aquifers in the condition we want, but I think we're starting to get an idea of what it is, the challenge that's in front of us. So one of the things also that happened recently in, as I mentioned, is the CV Salts Basin Plan Amendment was adopted by the State Water Board in October of this year. And this is a program that enables agriculture to have a greater amount of time to reach the nitrate groundwater standard, and enables us to divide up our areas where we have nitrates into management zones where we can do more specific activities, both for managing nitrate and for identifying domestic well users that might need clean drinking water. So the biggest thing is that we were able to get that additional time, the 35 years, onto our time frames that we currently had at 10 years. So in 2012, when our order is adopted, we were supposed to be meeting our drinking water standard by 2022. 2 years from now, we were under that current law supposed to be meeting that standard by 2022, which at the time we knew CV Salts was in the works. We were hoping that we would be able to get this adopted, which we have. So the only other tool the regional board had before that is they could put discharge limits on each of our farms, or they could just say prohibition of nitrate discharges. And the only way you can prohibit some of this leaching past the root zone is you prohibit the use of the product. And in our negotiations with the water board and the activist groups, they understood that would put us out of business. We cannot operate without nitrogen fertilizers. But the 35 years is intended to get us, get the technology up to speed that's going to help us as much as it can, and also give us the time to get these groundwater aquifers back in shape, both through Sigma and hopefully a lot of rainfall. But in exchange for that, we've got to figure out how are we going to provide clean drinking water in these management zones. And in the annual report, you'll see a lengthy description of what's going on with the management zones. And page 8 through 14, the priorities basins are Turlock, Modesto, and Chowchilla, and then in the south, the Kings, which is where I farm, Tule, and Kawia. These are the zones that are the management zones or the sub-basins that are going to get a notice to comply in March. Next month, we're going to get a letter that says, you've got to set up your management zones. So we're already beginning those discussions with the dairy industry and cities in those regions. We've got a lot of work to do between now and when the reports are due at the end of the year. In anticipation of this regulation coming through, CV Salts was able to get a grant to do a pilot project in Turlock. So we have some template plans that have been created that should help us meet these tight deadlines. We had the agriculture, dairy, and cities and wineries and food processor representatives around the table in Turlock. And I think we've got a really good start to developing what these management zones will look like. So there was a steering committee set up, and then the early action plan is where this drinking water plan needs to be put together. And based on what's happened in other parts of the state, South Valley and Salinas Valley, it's likely going to be a combination of installing free filling stations, water fill stations, where there's free water, or in some instances, it's going to be delivery of bottled water to these impacted communities and homes. So we continue to get questions about, now with CV Salts adopted, is why don't you just give Sigma all this work? Why don't you give these groundwater sustainability authorities, let them do all this stuff? Well, we're getting varying reactions. There's some GSAs that say, yeah, okay, we'll think about it, we'll consider it
consider taking this on. There's other GSAs that are saying there ain't no way we're going to take on that responsibility. And the reason is they aren't mandated. A GSA or a Sigma regulation was adopted by the Department of Water Resources. Our regulatory agency is the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Two different silos, two different regulatory agencies that are in California that are managing these programs. That's a huge hurdle to try to get coordination at an early stage. However, at some point in the next couple, 3 years, I can see what we're doing in these two programs merging together or collaborating as closely as we can. And the reason why is it's us in each of those programs. It's not a bunch of growers in Sigma and a bunch of growers in this program. We're all the same. We're all being regulated as irrigated agriculture. It makes sense to collaborate and try to save money where we can in any of the activities that are required. And especially this recharge, I know that's a high priority in these basins, and figuring out the recharge, that is going to be a huge benefit to us in our meeting of these groundwater protection targets that are in front of us. But I can just guarantee you these questions are going to be debated over the next 5 years, or decided over the next 5 years, to try to figure out what it is we're going to do with this. So one thing that we are continuing to do is the East San Joaquin Coalition is collaborating with the other water quality coalitions in the valley. As you all know, they stretch from the Oregon border all the way down to Kern County. There's 13 in all, 12 in all, 13 counting Rice. And we're finding that we're able to economize on the activities that we do. We do it wherever we can. And we're also finding and proving, I guess, the concept when we started this organization 17 years ago, that the economies of scale are much more efficient when we have a large number of growers and acreage that we're splitting these costs over. And it's mostly the overhead and the technical work that it's better to spread over more acres than having a county coalition in each area. I think that's one of the challenges that the Sigmas have, is there's so many of them. I believe that at last count there was about 12 Sigma groups in the East San Joaquin Coalition alone. Separate entities, separate authorities that are doing these plans. So anyway, the Central Valley, the coalition model continues to prove that it's an efficient way to do these. And Mike's going to be talking about the Groundwater Monitoring Collaborative. I'll let him go talk about that in more detail. But we do our own monitoring in our Coalition for Trend, but then we consolidate our reports so that we make sure that we don't have any duplication and save money where we can. And again, to just try to develop these reports at a lower cost. Okay, but one thing, the story's not completely written on the order that was adopted in 2012. As I've mentioned here, the past few years, there was challenges to the order, to the waste discharge requirements in 2012 by the activist groups, environmental justice and disadvantaged community organizations. And they allege mostly inside policy stuff. The anti-degradation policy wasn't met. The non-point source policy wasn't met. They betrayed the public trust by letting us report fertilizer. But the most important point for you all is they're challenging our ability to submit our data with anonymous identifiers. We are doing that now. We're going to continue to do that until a judge tells us otherwise. So that's a real key point. There's briefings that are underway right now. The first hearing is scheduled for June, and we're hoping, or we're thinking, that there's going to be a decision by late September. In the meantime, our order is as it is. We are continuing to do all the submissions to the Water Board with anonymous identifiers for your property, with the fertilizer applications and any of the other information that we turn into the Water Board. Okay, so I want to hand the microphone over to Michael and talk a little bit more about these crop coefficients and where all this is heading for on the technical side.
Okay. As Perry mentioned earlier, all of our groundwater issues are going to revolve around the amount of nitrogen that's applied and the amount of nitrogen that's removed. When you return in your summary reports to the coalition, you report your yield. That yield needs to be converted on a crop-by-crop basis to the amount of nitrogen that's removed. And we have a crop coefficient that's just simply a multiplier that says that for almonds, you know, 5% of your yield is nitrogen. And so we make that calculation, and then that is the amount of nitrogen removed. Those numbers applied and removed are critical, especially the amount of nitrogen removed. It's used right now in the identification of outliers, and it's going to be used in the future in our groundwater protection targets that Perry mentioned. Okay, so the crop coefficient is the number, and we have a series of numbers for each of our crops, most of our crops. And the idea is that if you remove exactly what you apply, which is actually not possible to do, but we try to get as close as we can, that there would be little or no nitrogen that would be available to leach to groundwater. Remember that nitrate, is a very soluble compound, very soluble molecule. It dissolves in water easily. It doesn't bind to soils or organic material. And too much water and too much nitrogen goes, especially if you have sandy soils, it'll go straight through to groundwater. So we have some numbers. I'm going to show you some pictures here in a minute. We have numbers for a large number of our crops. Actually, not so bad. We have pretty good numbers for most of our crops, but some of our crop coefficients are either missing or they need additional work. When we started developing these crop coefficients, it was actually done by the University of California. They scoured the literature. They came up with these crop coefficients. Some of them are from the Middle East. Some of them are from Spain. Any place where there might be comparable climate, that Mediterranean climate, they came up with a number. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're a good number for us here in California. So again, the crop coefficients are the numbers that we use to convert the yield that you report to us to the number, to the pounds of nitrogen that are being pulled off your field. In other words, that big jug of dark water that Perry said got hauled off to the packing plant, right? So there's an example here on the slide. Basically, it says that the crop coefficient for almonds is 0.068 pounds of nitrogen per pound of yield, per pounds of harvested material. So if you have a 2,000 pound yield, then the crop needs 136 pounds. And so if you removed 136 pounds, you're removing exactly what you put on. There are, however, going to be losses, other losses to the system. So there was a question earlier about sort of nitrous oxides, agricultural nitrous oxides. Depending on the type of fertilizer, how it's applied, how it's incorporated, there are going to be some volatilization and gas loss into the atmosphere. That's one place nitrogen can go that will never make it, into the ground and into your plant, into your crop.
Let me add on to that. So we had a question about then, what about the younger trees, the 4-year-olds, 3 and 4-year-old? Go ahead.
So there was another question that for the crop coefficient, do we have crop coefficients for young orchards, young vineyards, so young vines, before they're producing? Do we know how much nitrogen is being incorporated into that material, into that wood, basically, as they grow? And the answer is essentially no. We don't have that information yet. That's one of the things that we really need to do. But that's a research project. It would be great if some place like UC Davis or Cal Poly would take it on, Fresno State perhaps. But that's one of those things that we need to do. On the other hand, recognizing that we don't have a good crop coefficient, when you report to us that you have an immature orchard, we don't actually have an A over R and an A minus R number that goes into the regional board. So we take that into account. You're not penalized because you don't yet have a yield.
Okay, another good question, timely for this. So the A minus R calculation is done by our consultants, Mike's team. So when you submit your data, it's analyzed and then we mail that report back to you. Those just mailed probably last week. We're in the process of mailing those out now. You know, another calculation or another question that was asked is about foliar application of nitrogen. Is that a better way than applying it to the soil? Well, it certainly is, but unfortunately, there's not many crops where you can supply 100% of your nitrogen through the leaves. Almonds, tree fruit, those sorts of crops are kind of a medium, they have a median ability to absorb 200 pounds of nitrogen through the tree leaf system. So it's a good supplemental, but I don't believe that there's enough information that we know. And then the 0.68 that was up there, does it include the nitrogen allowed use for vegetative growth? My understanding is yes, that it does include that. And that's roughly 68 pounds per 1,000 pounds of nut meats. And then the other one, do other states have to deal with this? So the other states that are similar to us in nitrate groundwater regulation is Nebraska, some of the Great Lakes states, Iowa, I think they're working on it. Florida, somewhat. They have more phosphate issues because of their intense rainfall, but no, good old California, we're the lead in this nitrate reporting situation. And then the injection, if they're talking about injection into the tree, I'm not familiar with that technology. I know injection into a drip system, certainly, that's the most efficient way to apply nitrogen. And then, can we apply nitrogen that is not so volatile? I don't believe that the worst product for volatilization is the old anhydrous ammonia we used to inject in our furrows back, and not many people use that anymore. It can volatilize quite readily, but the products that we're using now, it's a very minimal amount of volatilization. And you know, the people that ask that are your fertilizer suppliers and the agronomists, certified crop advisors.
Yeah, excuse me, the highest volatilization rates actually come off of applications of things like manure that aren't incorporated quickly into the soil. So if you just throw a layer of manure on top, there tends to be more volatilization than the sort of the standard synthetic fertilizers that most of you use. Okay, so Perry mentioned that the answer to the question was for almonds that yes, that 68 pounds per 1,000 actually does include the amount of N that's pulled up into the tree itself as well as into the nuts. But that's about the only crop for which we have good information, and that's because the Almond Board has been very proactive in supporting research on that topic. Other commodities, walnuts are getting there, pistachios are getting there, and hopefully in the next couple of years we'll have some good ideas for that. But things like peaches and nectarines and those kinds of things, we don't have a very good idea of how much actually gets pulled into the trees themselves. Okay, the slide here basically shows you what we've got good, what we've got reasonable, what we've got poor, and what we don't have available at all. And so, if you look at this on an acreage basis in our coalition region, because almonds is almost, not quite, but almost half of the acreage, reported crop acreage in our coalition, about 75% of our acreage do have, for what we consider now, are pretty good crop coefficients. Another 21% there, as you can see, is kind of reasonable. We might want to improve them at some point in time in the future, but we can live with them for now. And then about 5% are either bad or not available at all. So we are going to have to do a little bit of work here as we move into the future. All right, so grower performance, again, as I mentioned earlier, all grower performance are going to be measured by two little sort of arithmetic operations. So the first one here is A minus R, the amount applied minus the amount removed. Again, Perry's big jug of dark water there that gets carted off. Regardless of any place else that nitrogen can go in the system, if you reduce the A minus R, you're going to reduce the amount of nitrogen available for leaching. Okay, that's just a given. There's probably only so much reduction that you can achieve, but getting that as low as possible is what we're all trying to hit. Now, The process that Perry mentioned, the CV Salts amendment, is a 35-year process. That means it's going to take us a while. It took us decades to get here in the first place. It's probably going to take a period of time, and lots of work to get us out of this situation as well. But the key here is to use the management practices that will reduce that A-R, reduce that potential for leaching. Okay, now the other little metric that we have is the ratio of A divided by R, and that is what we are using as a measure of grower performance, and that's what's used to determine outliers. An outlier is actually a parcel, a piece of ground. It's not an individual, it's not a person, it's a piece of ground. So you may receive a notice from the coalition that says that you have a parcel or two or however many that are outliers, or you may just receive back your nitrogen report that says all of your parcels are fine, they're not outliers, okay? But it is the parcel itself. One of the things that we have to do is we have to sort of accumulate all of those A over R values for everybody who grows almonds, for example, across our entire coalition region. And then we have to determine outliers. And Perry mentioned it was a statistical process. The method isn't particularly important. This is basically what we get and part of what we send into regional board. Remember that we talked about keeping your information anonymous for now. So this is part of what gets turned in to the regional board. It's called a box and whisker plot. So this is the box here. These are the whiskers, and those values there are outliers. The way that this method works is that if everybody's performance is good, there may be no outliers at all. This method doesn't require that there have to be outliers every single year. So if your performance improves, if you have a parcel that's or an orchard that's an outlier, and you bring it down, it's not, in a couple of years you may end up as an outlier again because everybody else improves their performance as well. Eventually, there can be no outliers in the coalition region. So working to improve performance will pay off. We do this A over R. We take your yield data, we convert it to R. We then calculate this A over R. And what we've done is we've started giving back outlier information to almond growers. Not because almonds are a particularly problematic crop. That's not the case at all. It's just that the almond acreage is so large that if we start with almonds first, we actually kind of get the biggest bang for our buck early on in the program. Okay? So almonds, actually, the performance of almond growers as a whole is, because I've looked at all these data, all this information, almond growers actually do a really good job. There are still going to be some outliers. Okay? So if you get some information that says you're an outlier, what does that mean? First of all, it means that you're going to have to either have your INMP worksheet certified either by a CCA who's attended some courses that are offered by CDFA through the coalitions, or you have to have if you self-certify, you're going to have to attend another course. The coalition will contact you and ask you to attend a crop-specific meeting on groundwater management practices sometime here in the next few weeks. You will have to complete this MPIR, this Management Practices Implementation Report. For those of you that have done a sort of a focused outreach survey for surface water, this is basically that process for groundwater. So you'll be asked to complete that form. It'll be turned into the coalition. You'll be asked if there are other practices that you might implement on your operation to help reduce leaching, and we will keep track of that. We'll come back the following year and quiz you. But the important thing here is that if you get an outlier, if you're an outlier, right? If you have a piece of ground that's an outlier, don't panic, right? We have 5 years. It's calculated. Being an outlier is calculated on 3 years of data in a row. If you got 5 years to make sure that parcel is no longer an outlier. That's plenty of time. to make a change and reduce that A over R value.
I'm going to jump in. We got some more pertinent questions. So somebody was asking about chipping your trees when you're removing the orchard versus burning them or hauling them off, whether that is a credit for nitrogen taken off the field. So far, we've not really asked that question, and whether that chipping is available immediately or over years, I think they're just early on in understanding that. I know that from the standpoint of compost, if you put sawdust on a field and try to grow a crop, I tried that with watermelons once, it sucked all the nitrogen out of the soil, because as it breaks down, raw wood material, it will remove nitrogen out of the soil until it's broken down, and then it re-releases it into the system. So it's not a point of crediting anybody or crediting your field when you take it off. You just need to be aware that you plant back into that, you better have adequate nitrogen for your young trees, because you may be nitrogen deficient. And then I know a practice around here that's commonly used, I see it in about this time of the year, is you take a backhoe and you cut through that clay pan. And really that's not, I don't believe that's a contributor to nitrate contamination any more than ripping your soil. The excess nitrate that's going to leach is going to be because there's excess nitrate, not because there's a pathway into groundwater. It may be quicker if you have excess, but really the question is, are you eliminating that excess nitrate? It doesn't matter if you rip it or you have hard pan. If there's no excess, there's no excess, not possibility for contamination. You want to add to that, or?
No, that I think Barry's right. That from a chemistry perspective, if there's a lot of nitrate in the soil, it just may take, if it's a heavier soil, it just may take a few more years to get it down there, but it'll eventually reach down. It'll eventually reach there. You can help it along if you kind of rip that hard pan. But again, the key here is to reduce the amount that you're applying, to improve the amount that you're removing, and to make that closer to a balance. Okay, one of the things that Regional Board is promoting, one of the things that we've talked about here in the past is pump and fertilize. In other words, if you're using groundwater that has nitrate in it, that nitrate is available to your trees, to your vines, to whatever, as just as readily as synthetic fertilizer that you would apply. And so there's an example here that if you have well water at 35 parts per million nitrate as measured as just nitrogen, and you apply 30 acre inches of water, you're actually applying 236 pounds of nitrate just through your irrigation supply water. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that your trees are going to get 236 pounds. Right? Because there's some inefficiencies in your irrigation system. You irrigate after the tree doesn't need that nitrate. So when you think about factoring in and using the nitrate in your irrigation supply water as part of your fertilizer regime, you need to be careful. You need to consult your CCA, your agronomist, whoever helps you with your fertilizer applications, and make sure that you're not shorting your trees, your vines, whatever it turns out to be, because you think you're putting on an excess amount of nitrate. At the same time, this actually is one of the ways that we can clean up groundwater aquifers. Trying to clean them up by pumping the water out, treating it to get rid of the nitrate, do all that sort of thing, is not feasible. There's been studies, it's prohibitively expensive, right? Just the power, the charge that it would cost, or the charge that it would take to actually just pump the water out of the ground, let alone treat it, is prohibitively expensive. It just can't be done. This is the way that we can, it's going to be slow, but we can actually help clean up groundwater, is if you use the nitrogen in that groundwater as part of your fertilizer. On the other hand, we actually are receiving calls from people who say, I don't even hardly apply anything, or I don't apply anything. And yet, because I take into account and I actually calculate how much nitrogen I'm putting on, I'm an outlier. Because my well water has so much nitrogen in it, so much nitrate, that even when I use as much as I need, I'm still discharging enough to make me an outlier. If that's the case, let us know. That doesn't make you an outlier. right? We can remove you from outlier status. We'll send you some documentation. You need to fill out a quick little form and send it back in, and then you won't be considered an outlier when we send in our information to regional board, okay? We want to encourage the pump and fertilize, not discourage it by making you an outlier.
All right, somebody got my question or my concern covered quite well. So what is a crop coefficient? It is an average, without a doubt, average of the amount of nitrogen that's taken off of a crop in a harvest. So the crop type has a lot to do with whether or not that number is just a rough average or is it fairly accurate. So for instance, almonds and walnuts, the nitrogen that's taken out, it doesn't, from what I understand, doesn't vary a lot between nonpareils and the hard shells, the other varieties. But it's a good question. We have almond board's got a table back there. I would be asking my commodity group. I know we used to have one in stone fruit that went out of business, unfortunately, but I know with stone fruit, my May nectarines have a whole lot less nitrate in them than my September varieties. There's a big variable between those, between early and late stone fruit. But almonds and walnuts, I don't think is much from what we understand. Corn is very stable as far as the amount between varieties, but again, I'd go back to my commodity group and say, hey, how good are these numbers? Because this is our standard. This is my standard as a grower that I'm going to be held in comparison for decades to come. So it is worth putting the money into finding good numbers. And then accurately estimating yield before harvest. Boy, I can't comment on that. That's a very difficult thing to do. I've not heard of good ways to estimate yield in nut crops other than, old guys looking at the trees after they've looked at them all their lives and they can kind of guess pretty well. But you see that happen and you can be off by multiples. So yeah, I mean, when you start planning your fertilizer applications in May, you can only estimate based on your historic yields, your crop potential. If you got lousy ground, if you've got 1,500 pound ground, you can't get 3,000 pound. So you got to be realistic when you estimate the amount of yield you can potentially get off of a field to closely match that fertilizer application. And then how do you figure A minus R in a young orchard year 1 to maybe 3 years that are not removing a crop? And again, Mike says, we're not reporting that. You don't have to report it. Just tell us that the trees are that age.
I need to provide you with information about our groundwater monitoring results and our surface water monitoring results and a surface water issue that we've got. So groundwater trend monitoring. As Perry mentioned, all of the coalitions are required to monitor their groundwater. It's a program that will last a long, long time. We go out, we've done 2 years now. We've done a 2018 and a 2019 samples. A lot of you have volunteered your wells, and we thank you for that. We've not been able to use very many of those wells because the requirements that the regional board imposes on the wells themselves, what we need to know about the wells. There aren't many wells out there that can satisfy that. So if you volunteered your well, great, thank you. We're still probably going to have to increase our wells, but that's out into the future. All right, so we had 12 wells in 2018. We added 9 last summer. We're going to add another 4, 5, or 6 this upcoming year. So we're slowly increasing our number of wells. Again, if you haven't volunteered your well, if it's basically a domestic supply well, you haven't volunteered it, you're one of those red circle areas up there on the screen. If you want to talk to us about it, please do. The coalition would actually do your drinking water monitoring for free on the coalition's dime. Okay, so one of the things Perry also mentioned is that we have a group of several coalitions called the Central Valley Groundwater Monitoring Collaborative. Each coalition is required to monitor we've decided to monitor our own wells. Each coalition has a different number of wells, so the only sort of cost-effective, equitable way to do that is each coalition does their own. But reporting will be done as a group. So we've got some well results here on the screen. You can see a map. You can see it's a little hard to see here, but you can see the size of the dots is basically the amount of nitrogen. And The important thing here is that they're, especially up in this area here in Stanislaus County, there's a lot of nitrate contamination in the groundwater. Some of these are as high as 50, 60. So as Perry mentioned, originally, if you had a 62 or a 66 milligrams per liter nitrate in the groundwater, we would have had until 2022, 2 years from now, to make sure that was down to 10. And there's no way that possibly could happen. So what we've done instead is, as Perry's mentioned, they've negotiated this 35-year window that allow us to try to get closer to that value of 10. Here's the set of results, and a couple of things. The bars in bluish color, which I think you can see the blues, those are the 2018 results. There's also some of the same wells in kind of red. That's the 2019. You can see there's a bunch of red wells, red bars there that don't have blue bars. That's because those are the new wells from last year. The red line, horizontal line across the bottom there, that's the drinking water standard. That's what we have to meet. This is actually kind of a good news, bad news. The bad news is there are some wells that are above that drinking water standard. Given the results that we've looked at in the past, that's not a surprise. But the good news is there's actually a lot of wells that are below that number. So it's not a completely bad story. Okay, so one of the things we've got to do, there are the Regional Water Board does have some issues with our groundwater network. We're going to have to, over the course of time, defend our well selection. So there's some discussion about whether our wells are representative of groundwater quality in the region. We'll work on that. Also, our well network is considered to be sparse. In other words, we don't have a large number of wells for the acreage that we cover. And we'll do our year 3 sampling in this upcoming summer, July through August. Okay, switching gears here. We're done with groundwater. Now we're going to move to surface water. One of the challenges to the East San Joaquin's order way back was from environmental groups who claimed that our surface water monitoring program was not rigorous enough, even though it's become clear to me recently that they actually had no idea what we were doing, but they complained anyway. We had too few locations. We didn't monitor them often enough. That was the general complaint. And so the state board said, we can't decide whether it's a good program or not, so they required the regional board to form an expert panel. This panel of experts will come in, they're going to evaluate our program, our surface water monitoring program, and then pass judgment on whether it's a good program, whether it's good and doesn't need improvement, maybe a little improvement, or we need to junk it and start over. We had our first meetings back in January, and at that meeting, the environmental group stood up and they said, here's what we want. We want growers to monitor themselves. They think that you have enough time that you could monitor the waterways in or near your properties 2 times a week, maybe 2-3 times a week. Go out and do that monitoring. It wouldn't take a lot, they say, but you guys, that would generate a lot of information if you guys just did your monitoring. What they would do then, if you found a problem in one of those creeks, you would then call a mobile monitoring alert team or whatever we want to call it, and that team would then mobilize and come out and collect more samples of that water. They also wanted a set of what they call integrated monitoring locations, although I have no idea what that means. At our next meeting, they're supposed to explain that, but they keep asking for it, although they've never explained what an integrated monitoring location is. And one of the other things is they want public access to all of your data, which at this point in time is not going to happen. Okay, so the first meeting of we had a 3-day meeting back in January, early January. You can see what it says there, but the important part here is on day 2, we took a field trip. Packed everybody into a bus. There were probably 25 or 30 people in the bus. The expert panel of 5 scientists. we packed everybody into a bus and drove them around, basically southern Merced County. It was about as far as we got, because we had to be from Rancho Cordova down to look at the area and then back in one day. One of the things they kept saying was, where's your water? Where's all the water? And you know, we hadn't had rain for a while, and there wasn't a whole lot of water flowing through most of the water bodies. So they were actually, I think, pleasantly surprised that we were monitoring all of the locations that we were monitoring, and we went out every month, even when there was nothing to collect. So that field trip was more than just all the people standing up on the first day talking and on the last day talking. That field trip really was kind of the big seller. The next steps. We have another meeting on late April. They want a bunch more information. Unfortunately, that is gonna cost a little bit of money for us to provide to them. But at this point in time, we have been given the indication that they probably aren't going to recommend any big wholesale changes. The information they want from us is sort of little details here and there that indicate that we're not going to see any big changes to our program. And here's the list of things that they want. They just want some examples. They just want a little bit of additional information. It's going to be another 3-day meeting in Rancho Cordova. And the big thing here is the bottom one. They want an explanation of data availability. So why aren't those data available to anybody simply by asking? And clearly we'll have answers for them, because it's not available because we negotiated it to the point where it's not available. If the order doesn't require it, they're not going to get it. Okay, I'm going to kind of rush through the surface water monitoring results here real quick. Just as a reminder, we have 6 zones, sets of sites. Each zone has 2 core monitoring sites. We switch off every second year. We change our core site. We monitor the core sites every month, 12 months of the year. If water quality is good at the core site, we don't have to monitor at the other sites in the zone. Some of our zones only have like 1 extra site. Some of them have 5 or 6 extra sites. So keeping water quality good at the core sites are really important in keeping the cost of the monitoring program down. Here's just the general map. This is, you see there at the bottom, this is, see page 23 of the annual report. This is the map that's in your annual report if you want to get a little better look at it. And here are your results for last water year. And again, there's a whole series of called physical parameters and bacteria and nutrients that we have issues with every year. We don't spend a huge amount of time dealing with those. We're going to work with regional board over the next several years to try to figure out how we're going to address those issues. But the one I want to pull your attention to is the one that's under pesticides. It says pyrethroid and chronic goal units. So we've had 2 exceedances at the core site of the pyrethroid triggers, right? So pyrethroids are now being required to be monitored in our program. We have to monitor, I'll show you here in a minute the list. It's a fairly big list, six compounds. And we can detect them. We have to be able to analyze them at tiny concentrations, parts per trillion, small parts per trillion. So we can detect these things with just a whisper of drift into the creek, and we can find these pesticides now. The analytical capabilities of the laboratories are that good. So what you can see here are the results from 18 and 19. The 18 ones are the blue, the 19 are the reds. And what you can see is last year, we had a couple of detections of the bifenthrin. We had a couple of lambda cyhalothrin and cypermethrin. This year, as you can see, we've got a lot more. And that's a problem. So again, we can measure them at very small amounts. We also have to add up the effects. So you could have little tiny amounts of all of the 6 chemicals, but when you add them up together, that is a problem. There aren't many other chemicals in there out there that we're working with where we have to add up their concentrations and come up with a trigger. So the ones, you can see the ones there: bifenthrin, permethrin, cyhalothrin, S-phenvalerate, cypermethrin, and cyfluthrin. We found the 4 that you see there. On 21 of your annual report, Perry's put a table in there that actually gives you the product names for those compounds. So if you're using those chemicals, and I think Perry's going to talk about this here in a second, but if you're using these chemicals, please, please, please be careful. Because based on the stuff we had in 18, this year our additional analytical cost is about $50,000 for our program. With what we've detected so far this year, and that starts, our water year starts in October, next year is going to be an additional $135,000 worth of costs to analyze for these chemicals in the water. So it's going to be expensive, and if we keep finding more of these chemicals, it's going to become more expensive.
Yeah, I want to just comment about that. We've been doing this for 17 years, and we got rid of so many problems, but now this new analytical technique is really raising the bar on these pyrethroids. And if you don't recognize these names, these are products used for hull split sprays, for the codling moth and walnuts. They're very widely used. They're very inexpensive. But just like this, having a red shirt on and a group of white shirts, when that analytical instrument goes in there and looks at the water, it can pick these out at 3 parts per trillion. It's amazingly low levels, but what they're finding is it does impact aquatic insects at those low levels. And because we don't have irrigation drainage anymore, I mean, most of the orchards that are going in now are drip and micro sprinkler. We really believe this is coming from spray drift. And spray drift is just, all it takes is one row that you're hitting, it goes in the waterway, and these products are very persistent. We could find them weeks later after an application. So the point being is, if you got a waterway near an orchard or a vineyard where you're using these products, please be really careful with your management of spray drift. And then a couple of real quick questions that have come through before we move on here is, this water moves from the mountains down to the center of the Central Valley. And what is that affecting? How is that affecting our well nitrate levels? That's really a hydrogeologist question that I'm going to get into with the newsletter, but generally we do know that that flow coming from upstream to downstream is carrying the nitrates. We've got better water over there because of that, and they are slowing down and accumulating on this end of the valley. And I know I've gotten some arguments with the guys over on the east side. Hey, we have no problems over here. Well, it may be because that water is moving down to the center of the valley and being replaced with clean water out of the mountains. And then the other thing is, there was a question about whether our outliers, if we have more or less organic growers that are outliers, and we don't collect that information. We don't know who our members are that are organic. I think that may be an interesting thing to look at in a few years, but right now we are not collecting that information or asking members to comply with this. And then, then these other ones we'll catch on our review in our newsletter. So Katie, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Okay, so we're going to quickly just go over the coalition overview here. So as Perry said, this is the year 17 for the Water Coalition, so that's not new news. We've got a little over 3,000 landowners and a little over 700,000 irrigated acres in the Water Coalition region. And no significant changes really in the last couple years, but we've seen a lot of coalition members combine acreage or expand acreage and shift between dairy and our program here. So some changes in reporting. All people are doing farm evaluations, so all of our members will be completing that next year. 2021 will be our next farm evaluation. We've got these two groups, we call them the MPIRs. We do them, they're like individual surveys that we've done. So if you've ever had one of those one-on-one, we come out to your farm and meet with you about a waterway near you. That's that surface water MPIR. And those are our management plan watersheds. And then the MPIR is the groundwater outlier packet. So if anyone was categorized as an outlier, you'll be completing an MPIR, one of those individualized surveys when you come to the meetings at the end of the month. And then we've got this new irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report and worksheet. This is specifically about the worksheet here, and that requires CCAs to sign off or growers who are self-certified. And those are in high vulnerability areas, and I think low vulnerability areas will be added in 1 year. I did get a question about this, about continuing education. So if you are self-certified and you require continuing education, we are working on getting some more local classes. So there will be some coming up at the end of the month, and we're also going to work to get a few more approved in our area, so hopefully it'll be easier to get those continuing education hours. And we're also going to have a round of these irrigation and nitrogen management plan self-certification trainings. Those will be in April, so watch out for a postcard coming your way. We're working on getting our CCAs booked now, but we do have a courses coming up in April. You can watch the ESJ website and the curesworks.org site for a list of all upcoming courses. We also have sediment and erosion control plan self-certification trainings. These are booked for May. Here in Modesto, it's going to be the 26th, and it'll be at the Harvest Hall, so we do have that one booked, and you'll be getting a postcard if you require them as sediment and erosion control plan certification. We do have this new irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report. So your summary report looks a little different this year than it has in years past. And that's to be completed and submitted to us by March 1st. And remember, your worksheets completed, signed off, and kept on farm. This is what that new worksheet looks like. You would have gotten this last year. It's a combination of Part B of the old farm evaluation and your old nitrogen management plan summary report. So it's the second year you've had this. And I have a question to follow up here. One thing that people were asking specifically on this new summary report is, almond growers, should you use your meat weights or your harvested yield? And either one is fine, but you'll see this little area right here for yield info. Just make sure you list whatever you're doing. So if you are reporting your meat weights, write meat weights in for us, and we can do any calculations that we need from there. The big difference on this new summary report, this is new this year, is you're going to see these 4 different categories for your applied nitrogen. So it's either in and irrigation water, organic amendments, dry and liquid fertilizers, or foliar applications. So it takes the 4 categories that were on the worksheet, expands them from 1 nitrogen number to 4 different categories you can report on the new summary report. And then these are those lists of practices that you've done on your farm evaluation. So it's just talking about your irrigation and nitrogen application practices. And then our member outreach about your summary report, you're going to get a packet, if you haven't already gotten it, about what your numbers looked like compared to growers in the area. And that's what Perry was talking about, townships and everything, combining all of that data, the box and whisker plots, and seeing where you lie compared with other growers in your area of the same crop. And again, one thing that's been a little confusing on these is we take your A over Y and convert it to A minus R. So if that number looks a little odd, it's because we've done the calculations on our end to convert yield to removed. Just a couple of things that have changed in the last couple of years. Our farm evaluation is now due every 5 years, so our next one will be due in 2021. Your irrigation and nitrogen management plan, that's still going to be kept on the farm. High vulnerability growers, you're already having it certified. Low vulnerability growers, you'll be having it certified in 2 years. Oh, you'll just have to complete it and keep that on farm. Just like you're doing, your summary report will be due next year. So you will have a summary report due. And then you guys got a copy of our general order, or you're supposed to have a copy of the general order on file. You can download that from the ESJ website. If you go to ESJCoalition.org, you can download a copy that fulfills your requirement. You can also call the office and we could print a version for you. So give us a call. It's a long document, so give us a heads up and then we can get it printed and you can come in and pick that up. But it is available on the Water Coalition website.
Okay, all of you got in the mail from us a ballot well, you got from us a change in our bylaws. So we are expanding the size of our board of directors and adding 2 more new positions. We have 9 board members existing, and now we're going to move to 11. So in this coming year, you're going to get in the mail from us a ballot for voting on these new board members. But the point, what I want to make is we're looking for new board members. This is very important positions for deciding the direction of our coalition. So if you're interested in applying or interested in being a representative for these counties, our 3 counties, then please let us know when we send out this information. The ballot that was sent out, the voting ends after this meeting today, so, oh, the 19th. Okay, so we've got another, it ends after the last meeting in Merced. So we still have a week to go, but please turn that in, and that will determine if that initiative passes to add these 2 board members. And so anyway, I encourage you to try to apply to participate to be on our board of directors. Now I'm going to turn the microphone over to Robert Ditto. Robert is in charge of the groundwater domestic well sampling program at the Regional Water Board. He had a table there that I saw many of you visiting, and certainly welcome to do that after the meeting. But Robert's going to go through just some of the points of the domestic well program that have occurred over the last year.
So good morning, I'm Robert Ditto from the Central Valley Water Board. I'm here to give you an update on the drinking water monitoring requirements that started January 1st, 2019. So it requires coalition members to sample their on-farm wells for nitrates if it's used for cooking and drinking. So the sample requirements, members are required to sample their domestic well annually. Samples need to be analyzed for nitrate plus nitrite as nitrogen. You must use an ELAP laboratory certified for testing nitrates, and past data may be used, but it needs to meet the new permit requirements. So sampling exemptions, we get this question all the time. So members who do not have to sample if the drinking water is not used for human consumption. So if you're using bottled water, you are exempt from sampling. So we do have, so if you fall into this category, we do have a sign-up sheet in the back if you want to take yourself off future outreach efforts if you are not using your well for human consumption, or even if you do not have a well. So this is the drinking water member information form. So this form's used for the first year of sampling. So you're required to fill out this form, take it with your sample to the certified laboratory. The laboratory will create a global ID number for you. So when the information is entered to GeoTracker, which is our groundwater database, it'll give your well a global ID number. So for the second year of sampling, you won't have to fill out the form. You'll be able to use the global ID number. That should be supplied with your lab report after your first year of sampling. So if you don't have this number, please contact the lab, or you can even contact us, Central Valley Water Board, and we should be able to get that information for you. So this is an important question on the drinking water member information form if you're the only one using your well. So if you answer this question yes, and your drinking water well sample result exceeds the drinking water standard, this fulfills that notification requirement that I'll talk about in a slide or so. So sample results, really this is kind of basic for this year. So if you're less than or equal to 10, you're gonna sample again this year. If you're greater than 10, there's a notification requirement, but no further sampling. So this is the notification template. So this template is used to notify users of the sample results and the potential health risks associated with drinking the water. So when your results exceed the drinking water standard, of 10 milligrams per liter, you're going to use this form to notify the users. You're going to sign this form and also send a signed copy to the Central Valley Water Board. So that's like our hard copy receipt that you have notified those users. And again, if you are the only person drinking the water and you answered yes on question 1J, no further, we do not need the notification template. But if you did not answer 1J, we will probably notify you to submit that notification template to us. So here's kind of a summary of the 2019 monitoring results. We had over 2,000 wells that were sampled. 1 out of 3 of those wells did exceed the drinking water standard. And we are following up with those members who did not provide us with a notification template if their sample result exceeded the drinking water standard. So we got this question last year about your personal information and how it'd be shown to the public. So this map is the GeoTracker map. So the laboratory enters your data goes into GeoTracker, and it's shown as a point on the map. I don't know how well you can see it from the back there, but this is the public view. When you click on one of these well locations, the only thing that shows is the chemical you tested for, and then the sample date and your result. So the APN's not on there, no personal information is on there. So here's some steps for success in year 2. Again, so it's very important that you use the same ELAP laboratory. You collect the sample. Again, use the global ID number. The global ID number starts AGW, and I think there's 9 digits after that. And again, if the results are less than or equal to 10, you're going to continue to sample annually. If the result is greater than 10, there is a notification requirement. So the coalition asked me to go over some questions that were frequently asked during the year, so we'll go over some of those questions that may help you. So if a grower didn't sample in 2019, what should they do? Again, you're going to sample immediately. You are a year behind, but as long as you get with the program, we should be able to move forward. So if you sampled in 2019 and the sample is less than or equal to 10, when do I need to sample next? Again, it's an annual program. You're going to sample in 2020. If the sample was above 10, what do I do next? Again, there's a notification to all users and the Central Valley Water Board, but no further sampling is required. So do I need to sample my well if I'm using a filter? And the answer is yes. You're going to sample prior to the filter as close to the well as possible. What follow-up do you intend to do for those who sampled in 2019? So we plan to do further outreach, probably a reminder postcard that you might have received last year just to remind you of the requirement. And then what follow-up do you intend to do with those who didn't sample in 2019? And we do have progressive enforcement that could include a notice violation, which could lead to potential monetary penalties. So any questions? I think the question is, if I have users, and no matter what my result is, I just notify them and tell them I don't drink the water. Does that suffice for the program in terms of continuing to monitor? And yes, so if you're not using the water for human consumption, again, cooking and drinking, you don't have to monitor your well. So the permit requires 3 years of a consecutive monitoring. If after those 3 years, your results are under 8 milligrams per liter, then your monitoring results are reduced to once every 5 years moving forward. So the question is, why sample again if it's under 10? The purpose of this program is to identify wells that exceed the drinking water standard and notify those of the potential health risks for drinking it. So if you are under 10, I think the theory, and this was put in our order by the state board, so I think the theory is that you're continuing to sample to see if it goes up or down. Why they chose 8, because there is a possibility you're going to get stuck in this no man's land of 8 to 10 milligrams per liter and have to continue to sample annually. So. Okay, so if you're a member on a farm and you do not have control of the well, so the well is located on that enrolled APN, as a member, your responsibility is to notify the landowner of that responsibility, and it's the landowner's responsibility to test that well.
Okay, Bob will be back at his table if you have questions. Thank you for coming. Appreciate your been a good audience.
you.